What is the route for the riders in 2025?
Well, as I said earlier, we are starting in Albania. Stage one is 160 kilometers from Durrës to Tirana. It's not the easiest stage. It's got over 2,000 meters of climbing in there. We're taking the Glatchen climb and then two climbs of the Surel, which is 4.9 kilometers at 5.4%. But the first kilometer is like 8%. It'll be an interesting one. There's certainly going to be a variety of riders who'll be looking to try and take the first Maglia Rosa of the Giro d'Italia. Stage two, we have a time trial around Tirana. It is 13.7 kilometers. There's a small climb in the middle of there, 1.2 kilometers at 5.7%, but 14 kilometers. You will see some time gaps amongst the GC favourites. It'll be somewhere in the realms of near a minute or so, possibly between a good time trialist versus somebody who's not so good. Stage three, we go from Vlore to Vlore, and we're taking two climbs. The last one, the Cafe e Rograze, is 10 kilometers at 7.3%. It's a bit of a weird one to predict. This could be one for a breakaway. It could be one for some GC action, actually, considering 10 kilometers at 7% is no mean feat. But then we have a long descent and then a flat to the finish. So it's a hard one to predict. It might well go to the breakaway if nobody wants to control it. And then we actually have a rest day where everybody hops on a ferry or something and goes from Albania to Italy, where we start off stage four, 189 kilometers from Alberobello to Lecce. This is a pretty standard sprint day, nothing too much going on here. Stage five, we go from Kegli, Messa Pica to Matera. The profile is kind of a little bit beguiling. It seems harder than it looks. The organisers seem to suggest this is going to be a reduced bunch sprint. It could very well go that way. So I think it's going to be an interesting one. It'll be a puncher versus sprinters who are hardy to kind of try hang on. Stage six, we go from Potenza to Napoli. This is 227 kilometers long. I think this is actually the longest stage of the race. We're taking two climbs in this day, one a category two, another category three, but we are on a net downhill for the day, so this will likely be another sprint. Stage seven, we go from Castel di Sannio to Tagliacozzo. It's 168 kilometers long. A lot of climbing in the day, just shy of 3,500 meters, and the climb up to Tagliacozzo is 12.6 kilometers at 5.3%, with the final 2.6 kilometers averaging 9.1%. I don't know whether the GC riders will control this day just for this climb, which averages kind of a low gradient but has a steeper finish. It might well go to the breakaway instead. Stage eight, we go from Giulianova to Castelraimondo. This looks like a classic breakaway day. There's four categorized climbs in here. One's a category one right in the middle of the day. It's up and down all day long, 3,777 meters of climbing. So this looks like a breakaway day to me. Stage 9 from Gubbio to Siena. Obviously, if you've watched Strade Bianche, you'll be pretty familiar with this stage because we're going to have some of the Tuscan Strade Bianche in this stage. I'm not sure exactly how many kilometers of gravel there are. Go up into Siena at the end, 700 meters at 9.1%. It's going to be a chaotic day. There's barely a meter of flat road in the final half of this race. So any GC riders who aren't used to one-day racing are going to have a pretty tough time here, in my opinion. Then we have another rest day. Obviously, we had one going from Albania, and now we've got our kind of first kind of proper, I suppose, rest day. Stage 10, we go from Lucca to Pisa. It's a 28.6 kilometer time trial, pretty flat. Therefore, you go look at guys like Josh Tarling to try and take the victory here. Stage 11, we go from Viareggio to Castelnuovo Nemonte. It's 186 kilometers long. We go up in the middle, 14.3 kilometers at 8.6%. But the two category two climbs finishing off the day are relatively shallow, averaging about 5% each, even though they are 11 and 6.5 kilometers long, respectively. So I think this looks a bit more like a breakaway day to me. Stage 12, we go from Modena to Viadana. Again, going to be a battle between the sprinters and the breakaway. We've got quite a bit of climbing in the first half of the stage, but then from a kilometer 100 to 172 is pretty much just flat all the way. So I think you're going to be looking at likely a sprint. Maybe some of the pure sprinters might struggle in the climbs in the first half. Stage 13 from Rovigo to Vicenza is 180 kilometers long. There's not that much climbing in the day, but when it comes, it's really kind of short and sharp. It's a real day for the punchers. The Vicenza climb at the end is a 1.1 kilometers at 7.5%. But inside that last 50 kilometers, you have the San Giovanni in Monte, 5 kilometers at 6.7%. The Vicenza climb for the first time, the Arcognano climb, which is 1.8 kilometers at 6.4%. So it's a really brutal puncher day at the end. I'm not sure how it will go, maybe to the breakaway or possibly to a team who brings a puncher who really fancy their chances here. Stage 14 from Treviso to Nova Gocia is 195 kilometers, very much like the previous stage. Apart from you have some less severe climbs towards the end, so I think this is more likely to end in a sprint because it's got a flat finish. Stage 15 from Fiume Vento to Assaggio, it's 219 kilometers long. We take in the Monte Grappa climb. As Scott mentioned this earlier, this is where Tadej Pogacar last year demolished everybody with the double ascent of this. However, we descend off this and go up the Dorio climb, 16.6 kilometers at 5.3%. And then we have this plateau to Assaggio. So, bit of a strange stage. I think it will probably go to the breakaway because there's no mountain top finish here, which is kind of a bit of a theme of this Giro, is that so far you will have noticed there's kind of been a lack of GC days, but that is about to be rectified because we go on to stage 16, which is the Piazzolo Sablenta to the San Valentino stage, 203 kilometers, 4,879 meters of climbing. The final climb is 17.5 kilometers at 6.3%. However, there are a couple of downhill sectors in there, so realistically, the average gradient will be a bit higher than that. And preceding that, we have the Santa Barbara climb, which is 12.8 kilometers at 8.3%. This is going to be arguably one of the most important stages of the whole race for the GC. Stage 17, we go from San Michele alle Agi to Bormio. This is 155 kilometers long. There are 5,722 meters of climbing in this stage, which is absolutely ludicrous. We go with the Passo del Tonale, 15 kilometers at 6%. The Passo del Mortirolo, 12.7 kilometers at 7.6%. And then we have this kind of strange plateau, slightly uphill sort of section at the end to the base of the Passo Stelvio. So again, I'm not sure how this will work. Maybe some satellite riders could instigate an interesting GC battle, but it could also just go to the breakaway as well, quite equally. Stage 18, we have a small break from the GC action. We go from Morbegno to Cesano Maderno. Again, this has got 3 categorized climbs in there, a category 2 and 2 category 3s. And I think this is realistically going to be, again, a battle between hardy sprinters versus a strong breakaway, more than likely. Stage 19, we go from Biella to Campoluc. This takes in 5 categorized climbs. We go through the Croce Serra, the Col Cescor, which is 16 kilometers at 7.5%, the Col San Pantelon, 16 kilometers at 7.3%, the Col de Joux, 15 kilometers at 6.8%, before going finally up the Antagnod, which is about 9 kilometers at 5%, and then we have a slight descent down to Campoluc. So that's a pretty brutal day. 166 kilometers and just shy of 5,000 meters of climbing. And then lastly, for the GC action, stage 20, Vélez to Sestlière, 205 kilometers, taken in the famous Colle delle Finestre, which is 18.2 kilometers at 9.2% with a gravel sector at the end, just for good measure. You know, why not? I remember you descend off the bottom of that, and then you have a 16.2 kilometer, 4% climb to round off that day. However, there are rumours that there's snow at the top of there at the moment, so therefore it might be cancelled, which would be a real shame, but hopefully, fingers crossed, it remains in there. And then lastly, stage 21, we have 143 kilometres of the circuit around Roma, which is obviously where Mark Cavendish took that famous victory. So that is the 21 stages of this year's Giro d'Italia.